Building characters has never been so fun in any other game as how it is in Elden Ring. I do believe that with Elden Ring, building a character, most of the RPGs will allow you to have this sense of difference between the characters that you make, but Elden Ring, it just clicks something special. The character feels so different, and that, despite of what people might say, it adds so much replayability value to the game, because every time that you try a new weapon and a new complete build, then the game feels different. You change your playstyle, you change your way of tackling the bosses, you change your strategies. And we got Shadow of the Erdtree coming. So I am going to still be making builds, but I wanted to revisit some of the old ones that I've made to see which ones were the most powerful. And here I'm going to show you 5 of my favorite builds that I have made. I'll be breaking them down in a little bit brief description, and then you can find them, the whole video for the whole builds, on the video description in case you want to make that build. Do have in mind again that Shadow of the Erdtree is coming, and you are most definitely going to be trying the new weapons that we are going to have in there. And usually, if the weapons in here are already all over the top, usually in From Software expansions, the weapons are even crazier. You do not have an idea of how different the weapons from Software DLC and expansions can be. So yes, we are most definitely going to be using those new weapons, but for you to get those new weapons, you need a proper build. So let's begin with number 1, which is going to be Bolt of Grandsex. What I love about spears, thrusting swords, and lances in this game is that you can pair them up with Barricade Shield, which gives you so much versatility when it comes to the playstyle and when it comes to the perks that you get for these builds. As a matter of fact, with this build, there is no downside, there really is no con that you can find in this build. Barricade Shield was nerfed because of how powerful it was and because of how much people were abusing of it. Barricade Shield basically turns you invincible. So with spears, thrusting swords, lances, and whatnots, you can use Barricade Shield from behind the shield. The Bolt of Grandsex, the beauty of the Bolt of Grandsex is that it's a dexterity based weapon, so you do not need to branch that much into your stats, and to make this build powerful you do not need to have to invest so many points. So it is not a very stat hungry build. It is not something that will cause your character to be such high level, and this build has basically everything. It has range, it has damage, it has distance, and it has defense. The Ash of War of the weapon is going to most definitely leave you quite open, but if you're using it against unaware enemies, you're most likely going to be one-shotting most of the most annoying enemies. And if you're using it on a boss fight, you can just let your Mimic Tier do the heavy lifting while you stay away, and if you want to be on the fray of battle, then just abuse the Barricade Shield. All in all, it's a weapon that has everything. Now then we have everyone's favorite, Swords of Knights and Flame, but with the Swords of Knight and Flame, we have the Regalia. With this specific build, what I made, I do go a little bit more in-depth with this build on why are we dual wielding this thing, but basically the main highlight of it all is that since they are the same category of weapon, you can power stance them. So you can power stance the weapons and they look amazing, they look nice. Swords of Knights and Flame, it's a fan favorite because of the AoE damage potential and the lockdown target potential damage that it has. But this build specifically, I planned it like this because if you pair this up with some talismans like Millicent's Prosthesis and then you use the Regalia, you basically enhance that colossal damage that the Sword of Night and Flame has. You basically use the Regalia Ash of War in one side, and once you have charged up that beautiful damage, then you spam the Sword of Night and Flame, and it just makes it more and more nuclear than it already was. Plus, you have the dual stance wielding, which is something that you can do for regular exploration in case you don't want to abuse of the mana that you have, the FP. So, there is indeed that a very powerful build. And then we have the Dragon Scale. Now, the Dragon Scale wasn't that amazing before. This was one of my favorite weapons when it comes to design, but nobody really liked it because if you compare it to different katanas that you have in the game, it was just not good. Now, in patch 107, I do not remember if it was in patch 107 or 108, they increased the spell buff duration for the weapon, which it was previously like 30 seconds or something like that. It just was hideous. It was not worth the effort. Now, they did increase the spell duration of the thing, but also they increased the damage of the spell buff that you would get for this thing. So, it used to be like 90-ish or something like this, if I'm not mistaken, and they enhanced it all the way to 160. So if you dual stance these things, if you power stance, you do have to go through several playthroughs to be able to dual stance it. But a weapon in itself, for the first playthrough, just the base weapon on itself, it's a force to be reckoned with. You do not really have to have the dual stance version of the build. Just the weapon in itself, it's one of the coolest looking weapons with one of the coolest animations, and it also has electric damage that deals frostbite. So you basically have cold lightning with this weapon. How cool is that? It's just one of my favorite weapons, and I cannot be happier that they did show some love to this weapon, because everyone was just in love with Rivers of Blood and Moonveil and the different katanas that you have in this game. But this one, this is the one. This is the way. Anyways, let's move on to the next one, which is the Royal Greatsword. Now, the Royal Greatsword, a thing about Greatswords is that From Software has been pushing and pushing and pushing the Greatswords to be great, because what people usually does is that they dual wield, they power stance greatswords, and then they spam jumping attacks. To prevent this, they increase the damage percentage when you dual wield these weapons. They increase the scaling of these weapons. They increase the poise damage of these weapons. And all in all, if you build properly this character like I did on this build, on this video, you can end up having just 1k raw AR, which is crazy. The thing is that the Ash of War of this weapon is just beautiful. It's amazing. It plunges you into the air, and it makes you go into a hyper armor state situation. Once you're in the air, it doesn't matter what hits you, you're not going to be interrupted. Some people catched in my video that when I get to this point, I do get staggered. I am not getting staggered. The thing is that that enemy specifically was doing a sustained attack when that happened, and then I got staggered as soon as I hit the ground. But with this weapon, while you are in the air, you have infinite hyper armor and you cannot be staggered. You can be killed, so you have to be very aware of that. It's also going to cause flinch damage to the enemies while you are on the air animation. And then finally, it's going to explode ice on the weapon. You're most likely not going to be causing frostbite with this weapon, but it's just huge amounts of damage that you have for your basic attacks, have huge amounts of damage that you have for the Ash of War. But also, with this build that I made for this weapon, I do believe, if I am not mistaken, that I did it with 80 intelligence. And since that is the case, you have 80 intelligence. Magic is very powerful, and you do not really need to invest that much into mind to use the rest of the sorceries, because the power of the weapon for exploration is already broken. So it's basically one of the most, I would say that this is much better than the Moonlight Blade for a pure sorcerer build, just because of the destruction capabilities that the weapon has on itself. And then finally, out of them all, my favorite. This is my favorite. It is not the most powerful of them all. It is not the most broken of them all. It is broken, do not get me wrong. It's just that the previous ones that I showed you, they have a little bit more strength. But this one, oh boy, the Bloody Heelys. I'm just in love with this build. I love it so much because the weapon is so stylish, dude. The weapon is just so stylish, and it has so much going on for it. So let me tell you a little bit about this build. The most amazing thing about this build is that it is not a stat hungry build, and you're able to accomplish this build at 125. And as a matter of fact, when you go to the build video, if you want to go watch it, that's where I capped this build. But you can go higher, 150, and get a little bit more things. But let's talk about what this build has. It has 80 arcane, which is the weapon that which is the thing that the weapon scales with, the damage. So we have the highest damage possible. And do not be confused. Bleed was nerfed, but bleed was never the main purpose of this build. It's just an extra asset that the build has. And also bleed was never nerfed when it comes to one-handed status build-up. Bleed was nerfed for the plague that we had for the dual seppukus and dual wielding bleed weapons. This thing still has bleed going on for it. Bleed for this build is still very strong, alright? So the thing is that the bleed is not the main purpose of this build. The shining thing is going to be the bloody healers. The bloody healers, you can use it from behind a shield to poke enemies from behind a shield and deal huge amount of damage because you have the highest possible scaling that we have for this build. You have the highest possible scaling on bleed build up as well. I know that scaling stops for bleed. Scaling stops at 45 arcane. That's the soft cap for bleeding build up. But the thing is that we're using the arcane stat to build damage, not the bleed. The bleed is a side effect, and it's an amazing side effect, but it is not the main thing, right? So the Ash of War gives you iframes, and you have to master it, but once you do, oh boy, the damage that it deals, it's just amazing. And it makes you look so stylish. And with this kind of build, you look so elegant, so graceful, so forceful, and also like a predator. I think that if you want to cosplay as a vampire in this game, which is kind of my vibe, then I think that that is why this is my favorite build, because it gives me that vampire vibes, and it's just so beautiful, and the weapon, it's just chef kiss. So there you go, 5 of my favorite builds that I have made that you can try out to use in Shadow of the Erdtree. If you like the content, liking the video is super appreciated. No, it's told you today you're a gorgeous and beautiful person. You are indeed a gorgeous and beautiful person. Remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel before you close the door. Now that we've seen you goddamn gorgeous and beautiful people in the next one. Have a beautiful day and goodbye.